You are wrong about Skyrim ports. I know, big dumb thing to open the episode with. Never tell the audience they're wrong, never tell them they're stupid. Oh, I've done that before? Oh, yikes. Sorry everyone, that was years ago. I was a different person then. You know how the passage of time can change a person from a crass, witless jerkass just trying to get a rise out of people into someone who produces something extraordinary? And I don't mean to suggest that PortsCenter is even remotely on the level of this spectacular piece of cinema, but the tenor, tone, and shape of my videos has come leaps and bounds from the sort of thing I was producing when I first started out. This guy, this person here, he's an idiot. Oh, he has a lot of things that I don't. He has regular income, a better haircut, a functioning immune system, but I do not like this man. And he has made some bad videos. I made some bad videos, but I make better videos now, or at least I try to, and that's good. That's right. I'd be worried if I didn't, in all honesty. We're supposed to change and grow with age. A person is a continual work in progress. We start out as storyboards and spend most of our lives as rough pencils long before we see even a drop of ink. And though I could extend this metaphor out to a detailed breakdown of which part of the animation process each stage of life is, that's not what this video is about, though hey, that might make a good entry for a Lessons Animation Tortoise video if somebody smarter than me wants to have a crack at it. No, instead, I'm going back to my original statement. You are wrong about Skyrim ports. I promise you that is not an attack. It's okay to be wrong. Being wrong is good. It's a learning opportunity. Being wrong is the first step towards discovering something new and exciting. So take my hand and let's discover something new together. I mean, I say let's. I already know this. I obviously have to know to make the video. Let's just roll the titles. Skyrim was a big deal. Bethesda made a big showing of the game at the 2011 Electronic Entertainment Expo, or E3 to use its name, and I was able to experience that firsthand at the time because the ESA mistook a shitty little Tumblr I ran in a previous life as a certified shitheel for an actual bona fide industry blog and gave me a press pass so I could mill about pretending I belonged to be there alongside the people I'd made a name for myself mocking. God, I was just the fucking worst. Skyrim dropped on November 11th, 2011, a date most of you will remember thanks to people on the internet with a fondness for repeating numbers. The game came out for the PC, the PS3, and the Xbox 360, every major system at the time, in fact, save for the Wii, which didn't have the horsepower. An epic, open-world action RPG, Skyrim is rather a lot like Dungeons & Dragons without the pesky obstacle of needing friends to play it with, which is good because, like most video game YouTubers, I haven't got any. The differences between these versions is minimal. The 360 and PS3 versions are locked in at 30 frames a second. The PC version has mod support as well as a free high-def texture pack for PCs that can handle it. But other than that, these ports are near identical, so there's very little to talk about. Things get slightly more interesting, though not by much, when we look at the 2016 Special Edition re-release for the PS4 and Xbox One, as well as the 2017 re-release on the Nintendo Switch, and the VR version put out in 2018 for PlayStation VR, as well as various PC-based VR systems. Nope. Again, these are all largely the same game. They feature all of the downloadable content for the original game, but the textures are vastly improved over the 360 and PS3 versions. The Switch looks a little better than the original console release, but it's really the special edition that shines with the highest quality textures and mod support even on consoles. But they're still essentially the same game. Whether you're playing Skyrim on the Switch, the 360, or the PlayStation 4, you're going to run into the exact same situations, near identical level geometry, and almost all of the same bugs. There's really not a lot to say. Thanks for watching this week's episode. Don't forget to ring that bell. No, that's obviously not the end of the episode. I mean, look at the timeline down there. We're barely 5 minutes into the episode. The truth is, this episode isn't really about Skyrim. Why would it be? This isn't an 8-bit video game where each version was developed by a different team working more or less from scratch, or a handheld port of a beloved 16-bit era platformer. No, this is a 21st century game developed with a multi-platform release in mind from the beginning. It uses an engine designed in-house with ease of portability in mind as part of its development process. There's really nothing to say about Skyrim itself. However, it's important to note that Skyrim's multi-platform release has been the subject of a little mockery by the game-playing populace out there, and the game's constant reissues on new platforms has led to folks mercilessly ripping into both Bethesda and studio lead Todd Howard, seen here awaiting the upward bounce of a basketball. But the fact of the matter is that Skyrim really hasn't been reissued that much. Since its initial release, it's seen a special edition, a Switch edition, and a VR edition. That's it. That's really 2 reissues, maybe 3 or 4 if we want to be generous and include the VR versions. Compare that with Rayman 2, a game which got re-released on the PC, the N64, the PS1, PS2, Dreamcast, DS, 3DS, iPhone, Game Boy Color. Everybody gives Bethesda a hard time. But where are the people scoring 3-point dunkaroos on Ubisoft for cranking out several separate ports of Rayman 2 over a 12-year period? Or we could go a little more recent with Resident Evil 4, a game which started out life as a GameCube exclusive and then went on to become arguably the most ported game of its generation. The truth is, we dunk on Skyrim because this sort of release pattern really isn't normal anymore. We're used to day and date multi-platform releases, but back in the day, staggered releases were far more common. They were the norm, in fact. Let's go back to SimCity, which first dropped for the Mac and the Amiga in 1989, although development of this game actually began on the Commodore 64 4 years earlier. The C64 version would ultimately drop after the Amiga version, but it all begins here. This is the first version of the game Will Wright worked on, and it was huge. Ports later followed for a number of popular systems of the time, including the IBM PC, Atari ST, Acorn Archimedes, Amstrad, Super Nintendo, FM Towns, and 2 separate Windows builds, all released between 1989 and 1994, and that's not counting the NES version that was in development but ultimately cancelled. Donkey Kong is a similar title, having initially hit arcades in 1981 before being ported to practically every home system going over the next decade. Or what about Flashback, released for the Amiga in 1992 and later ported to a bunch of home consoles and computers? Or there's everybody's favourite mechanical donkey simulator, Mule, which began life as an Atari 8-bit title in 1983 and spent the rest of the decade slowly trundling its way across multiple systems, including the Commodore 64 and the MSX2, before ending its journey with a port for the NES, 7 full years after its initial Atari release. Nobody made fun of Mule or Donkey Kong or Flashback or SimCity, in part because each separate version had its own quirks and foibles, but also because this is just how games were released back then, and it's still sort of like this later into the 90s when a game would come out for one system before slowly but surely trickling out to others over a couple of years. Which still sort of happens sometimes. We still occasionally see games hitting consoles months or years before a PC release ever finds its way out of the studio. Or very rarely when it happens the other way round, with a PC release coming first before being followed by a console port later on, though this happens more with smaller indie games. The simple fact is, we're not used to this slow trickle of ports anymore. We've become used to more or less every major system getting the same game basically right away with little or no variation between systems, followed by a Mac port at some indeterminate point in the future, and an HD remaster a few more years down the line for whatever the next generation of consoles is, which is bonkers because that is exactly what happened with Skyrim. The special edition came out in 2016, 5 years after the original release. That's the same amount of time between the 25th anniversary Blu-ray release of the Back to the Future trilogy and the 30th anniversary Blu-ray release of the Back to the Future trilogy. And the only real difference between these two releases is the special features. They didn't even bother remastering the movies. But for the record, I still bought both of these releases. Ultimately, the only thing that has really changed is us. We've gotten used to multi-platform releases happening simultaneously, when for the longest time, that simply wasn't the case. We kind of take for granted that making a video game is a huge amount of work, a workload that has only gotten bigger. We complain about day one patches and server outages when it was not too long ago that the idea of fixing a broken game with a patch was unfathomable, especially on a console. Worse, we are spoiled. We can play last-gen games on newer systems thanks to backwards compatibility. We can play top-notch, top-tier multiplayer games online for free, games that 12 years ago would have cost us 20 or 30 bucks. We can select the DLC we want a la carte as opposed to waiting for expansion packs or standalone content dumps. If we don't like something about a game, we're occasionally given the tools we need to change, edit, and modify it, and a place to share our mods with the community. Hell, sometimes if we're really lucky, those mods get rolled into the game officially, and we take it further. We take it too far. Sometimes, if we don't like the way a game ends, we can complain. We can make noise and kick up a stink until the developers kowtow to our demands and change it. We can get a writer for a game, a woman, fired from her job just because we didn't like her tone on Twitter, just because we think we know better than her. When a film comes out that doesn't meet our expectations, we don't just grumble about it. We harass the people who worked on it. We drive them off of social media. We try to get them fired, and then we set up websites claiming that we can do it better. Which brings me back to Skyrim, because every time we've heard that music at a press event or a trade show, the expectation is that Bethesda are about to announce a new Elder Scrolls game, and instead, they've announced, well, this. At some point, our expectations became entitlements. We don't just expect something to be exactly what we want it to be, we demand it. And if it falls short of those expectations, we riot. That's dangerous. That's deeply worrying. Maybe you think I'm jumping to conclusions, drawing a direct line from people saying Skyrim has been ported a billion times to entitled fans getting up in arms over a movie about laser swords, and maybe you're right, but it's hard for me not to see a connection. We believe it to be so, and therefore it is. It stops being opinion and it starts being fact, and you can't argue with fact. You can't debate someone who labels their thoughts, feelings, and opinions about something as fact, because they become immovable. In the very first episode of The Colbert Report, fictional right-wing pundit Stephen Colbert, played by comedian Stephen Colbert, whom you might recognise from The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, coined the word truthiness, which he defined as something that seems like truth, the truth we want to exist. Later, in an interview with the AV Club, Colbert, speaking as himself, went on to describe truthiness as the attitude of what I say is right, and nothing anyone else says could possibly be true. People get like that about their politics. That's almost always been true, but it feels weird that that's where we are with discourse surrounding video games, surrounding movies, surrounding anything anyone has to say about their opinions on stuff. That people feel so strongly, they feel so angry and aggressive about something that, well, I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, because stories do matter, but is the idea you have in your head so important, so immutable, that it cannot be changed with new ideas? Are your expectations so rigid that you cannot accept something that doesn't meet them? Is your worldview so fragile that it is incapable of withstanding disappointment? You are wrong about Skyrim ports. What else are you wrong about? And are you brave enough to admit it? I'll be honest with you, when I started writing this episode, this is not where I thought it would end, and I deleted a huge chunk of the script towards the end there, and then rewrote it, because I'm not 100% sure whether it's relevant to the subject matter, but it is something that has been sitting on my chest for a while, and apparently I needed to get it out. So thank you for indulging me. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode. Until then, thank you for watching. Do feel free to subscribe if you're not already, and thank you very much for being my best friend. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very, very much. Catch you again next time.